I'm delighted to be joined now by the Leader of the House of Commons, Lucy Powell. Lucy, I've seen you've been talking to the Daily Mirror this morning. 30 bills before Parliament. 30 bills, but a pretty precipitous slide in the polls, going from around 44 before the election, now to the mid-20s. Some polls put you in third place. What went wrong?
Well, look, we always knew it was going to be difficult, and it's proven to be the case. People voted for change at the election because the country was, let's face it, going to the Swanee. We had the economy tanking, with living standards having fallen for the first time in a generation, and public services absolutely on their knees, with huge waiting lists in our NHS and elsewhere. So it's a bit like turning a really big oil tanker around. We've begun to start moving it in the right direction, but there are many fundamental challenges facing the country that has meant we've had to take some difficult decisions so that we could get the money into the front line of the NHS and skills and education, and sort out our transport system and really start putting working people at the front of the queue again. And that's been a really difficult job that we've had to do. And it's, you know, we didn't think it would be popular, but hopefully people will judge us in 4 years' time on whether they feel better off and whether their public services have improved.
I know a lot of people will accept it's a very difficult job for any government, particularly given the global and economic situation that we all face. But perhaps in the run-up to the election, things were said that have made your job a little bit harder today. I want to show you a tweet of yours from a few years ago about the WASPI women. You were celebrating Birmingham Town Hall being lit up in purple in support of the WASPI Women campaign, saying that these women deserve compensation. You're standing with a group of them there. You were a big supporter of the WASPI Women campaign. And then we learn that in government, you reneged on that pledge.
Well, we've not reneged on a pledge because it wasn't in our manifesto that we would offer recompense for the WASPI women. That very clearly wasn't in our manifesto this time around. But look, I understand why people are really disappointed. You know, these are women from a generation who were told one thing, and particularly in 2011, when George Osborne really accelerated that move to the pension age of 67, was really when the WASPI Women campaign came to light. But actually what this Ombudsman report was not looking at that decision. It was looking at whether the communications had been right in 2004. And we accept they could have been better, which is why the government has apologised. But what we couldn't accept was that the £10 billion price tag compensation for that particular small bit of it from 2004 was a proportionate or appropriate use of public money at this stage.
Sorry, Lucy Powell, you thought that it was appropriate
that report was only out
a couple of years ago. You thought it was appropriate when you posed with the WASPI women ahead of elections. You thought it was appropriate when you saw Birmingham Town Hall lit up in purple in support of the campaign for compensation. And your party leader, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, clearly thought it was appropriate when only a couple of years ago he stood with the WASPI women. Have a look at this picture here where Keir Starmer is pledging his support. This is in 2022, so after all of those dates that you mentioned, and he's pledging fast and fair compensation for the WASPI women. It's easy to see why people feel betrayed here.
Look, I can understand why people are upset and concerned, and certainly for my part, though, that picture of Keir Starmer there, is it not from 2018?
2022.
All right, it says on your clip 2018.
The page is confusingly called 2018, but below the date is 2022.
Right, OK, fine. Well, look, it was in our manifesto in 2019, so some 5 years ago now, but we lost that election, and we lost that election pretty badly. And that's because one of the reasons we lost that election was that people didn't think we could pay for all the commitments we've made in our manifesto. Come to 2024, there was no commitment in our manifesto to compensation for the WASPI women because we wanted to make sure we could afford all of the commitments that we were making, and we've made that judgment at that about that Ombudsman report that was only published last March. And as I say, the big decision that was taken that most of the WASPI women feel most aggrieved about was in 2011 when George Osborne really accelerated that to be faster.
Yes,
and that
I think everyone watching will be able
this
to
report was talking about.
Make up their own minds as to whether people were given the impression in the election that this was something the Labour Party supported or otherwise, whether or not the specific terms were in the manifesto.
A feature of this. It wasn't a feature of this election.
But we do have much more to cover, Lucy Powell, because you're talking about many other bills that are being brought before Parliament, one of which is the Education Bill. And there have been some people fairly concerned that the Education Bill that you've put before the Commons is rolling back a very, very successful programme started by Andrew Adonis under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and carried forward under the coalition government that has massively improved the life chances of children, particularly from the poorest backgrounds. Why is this government rolling that back?
Well, we've got a Children and Wellbeing Bill that was introduced to Parliament just before Christmas that does a range of things, from introducing and making mandatory breakfast clubs, from tackling some of the excess prices that people have to pay for uniform costs, and also tackling some of these issues around homeschooling that we've seen so starkly recently in the Sarah Sharif case. But it's also about making sure that all schools, whether they're academy or local authority or voluntary aided or any other type of school, that all schools operate towards the same set of standards, whether that's the national curriculum, which, to be honest, the vast majority of schools teach to anyway, and that there are some underpinning standards that we expect across all schools. That academies will still have the freedom to innovate and the freedom to make decisions about their own schools in other ways. But we just want to make sure there are some standards across all schools. Something that, frankly, the sector have been calling about for a long time.
It's also admissions, which would then fall back to local councils and the system that existed before. It's also the pay scales of teachers in these academies, all being set centrally. You're taking power away from academies that have been perhaps, well, if we're being generous, or I'm not sure if generous is the right word, but certainly independent analysts see it as one of the few successes of the last 14 years that really, in terms of literacy, in terms of maths, children are doing a lot better, particularly because of the independence that was given to these academies. And now you're returning many of these powers to local authorities. And say what you want about local authorities, perhaps they've got other things to worry about.
Well, actually, your evidence base there is not correct. When you look at schools across the whole, the performance in academy schools versus local authority or other types of schools, you have some very good schools across both sectors. You have some schools that have challenges across both sectors. The academy system now is many schools. It's nearly all, it's most secondary schools, and it's many other schools as well. So when it was first brought in, actually by the Labour government 20 years ago, it was for a tiny number of schools to try and give them the opportunity to make some changes. So the evidence base is not that academies are better schools or get better results. That's just not the case. And when it comes to admissions, I think what I know from parents that I speak to, and I'm a parent myself, I think the vast majority of people want there to be a fair and transparent process when it comes to admissions, that you can access a good local school nearby where you live. And I think that's really important, that we have a system, therefore, that is run and planned on a place basis and not a sort of free-for-all that we've seen in the past, which leaves some children with no school or a school that they haven't chosen to go to being allocated.
Just finally, Lucy Powell, of course, we've heard your government talk a lot about how the first budget is one that you don't want to repeat. It's fixing the foundations for more positive news in the years to come, in the remaining years of this Parliament. So can you make a promise for us now that there'll be no further tax rises in future budgets?
Well, it's not a budget that we don't want to repeat. It's a budget we had to do at the time. We had to raise taxes. Why did we have to do that? We had to do it, first of all, to sort of fix some of the foundations in the public finances, and there was this big black hole there that we had to plug, otherwise we would have run into all sorts of problems. But just as importantly, perhaps more importantly, we know we needed to get more money into the front line of our public services, particularly into our health service. And that's why we've seen the biggest settlement for the NHS in a generation to start to tackle these waiting
To press
times.
you on the question, no new taxes?
Because for us, the healthy economy and a healthy society absolutely is inextricably linked with a growing economy and an economy where everybody fairly shares some. If you're waiting for a hip replacement operation, you can't work.
Okay, but to press you, because we're short for time, can you make a commitment on taxes?
I'm not going to write all future budgets on your programme this morning, but we did have to raise significantly taxes this time in order to restore and to try and get our public services, our transport, our health, our skills, everything that's vital to a growing economy moving forward again. And that's why we had to take the decisions we did. OK, but no guarantees going forward. Lucy Powell, Leader of the House of Commons, thank you so much for joining us here on the Camilla Tominey Show. Really appreciate your time and a very Merry Christmas. And you.